The arrival of the alien fleet was a moment that would change everything for Earth. Korath stood at the helm of his massive warship, staring at the planet below with his hands clasped behind his back. His mind was sharp, calculating every possible outcome of their mission. The fleet had come from far across the stars with one goal: to observe humanity, to assess their potential as either a threat or a curiosity. They were a species on the brink of discovery, yet to Korath, they were nothing more than primitive beings. Their technology was rudimentary. Compared to his own fleet, their civilizations were young and fractured, yet it was his job to determine if Earth posed any danger to the Galactic Empire he served. Korath gave the order to begin the silent observation. He wanted no contact, yet he wanted to study them from afar. The fleet remained in orbit above Earth, while its various members gathered data analyzing human behavior, their cultures, and their ability to adapt to challenges. Their scientists began sifting through Earth's communication networks, learning about human history, technology, and art. But none of this interested Korath. He didn't care about their music or their paintings. He wanted to know how they fought, how they strategized, how they would survive if pressed into a corner. He wanted to see their survival instincts tested to their limits. With this in mind, Korath had his officers focus on something specific: on Earth children. He was curious how a species that had not mastered space travel could instill the kind of discipline and cunning required to fight a galactic war. Korath believed that the young minds of the planet might reveal more than the adults. They had not yet been hardened by the weight of centuries of conflict. They had no preconceived notions of what war was, and he thought perhaps this would make them more unpredictable, more dangerous. He wanted to observe this unpredictability from a distance, and so the fleet's officers monitored human children as they went about their daily activities. They watched as they played and learned. They noted their games, their simulations. But none of this data was more interesting than what they found on a small suburban Earth home on the outskirts of a city. A young girl sat in front of an ancient computer console. Her small fingers tapped the keys as she focused intently on a Starship simulator game. It was a relic of the past, a game that had seen better days long before humanity had ventured into the stars. And yet here she was playing it with unmatched concentration. Her name was Emily, and Korath's attention was immediately drawn to her. The game was primitive by alien standards. Its graphics were outdated and the controls clumsy, but it was a challenge. The game placed her in charge of a fleet of starships. She was responsible for their movements, their tactics, and their survival. Korath's officers expected the child to fail quickly. After all, she was just a child, and the game was difficult even for adults to master. But what they saw instead stunned them. Emily was winning. She wasn't just playing the game, she was outsmarting it, using strategies that seemed too advanced for someone her age. Korath could hardly believe what he was seeing. He ordered his officers to track her progress more closely. The more they watched, the more intrigued they became. This was no ordinary child, and Korath felt a strange curiosity rise within him as he watched Emily take on challenge after challenge in the game. It was clear that this was no simple game to her. It was something more, and Korath knew that he was witnessing something unexpected, something he hadn't anticipated in the young human girl on Earth. Korath's fascination with Emily grew stronger with each passing moment as he watched her play the simulator. The game had become a reflection of her mind. Her decisions were fast but precise. There was no hesitation as her fingers danced over the keys. She commanded her starships with a confidence and clarity that defied her age. The complexity of the tactics she used seemed to surpass even the most seasoned commanders in his fleet. One particular match stood out in Korath's mind. Emily was facing a fleet of larger ships. They vastly outnumbered her force, and the game's settings made it nearly impossible to win. Yet Emily didn't retreat. She didn't panic. Instead, she calmly analyzed the battlefield. She recognized the key weaknesses in the enemy's formation, and within moments she had turned the tide. Against overwhelming odds, she had split her fleet into smaller, more agile groups, using terrain features in the game to create ambushes and cut off the larger ships' escape routes. It was a risky move, one that could easily backfire if it weren't executed flawlessly, but she made it work, and in the end she emerged victorious. Korath stared at the screen in disbelief. How could a child understand the delicate art of warfare so deeply? The tactics she used were bold and creative, something far beyond basic strategy. It was as though Emily could predict her enemies' moves. Before they even happened, Korath's mind raced. Was it possible that humans, despite their relative youth as a spacefaring species, possessed something that others in the galaxy didn't? Perhaps it was a way of thinking, something inherent in their nature, something that could not be taught, but simply understood over time. He ordered his officers to dig deeper into the game, to analyze the specific decisions she was making with the hopes of uncovering some hidden truth about her thought process. But even as they tried to make sense of it all, there was no clear answer. Her decisions were fluid, unorthodox, and unpredictable. There was no pattern to her genius. And yet it was undeniable this child was more than just a player. She was a force to be reckoned with. Korath found himself torn. He had come to Earth with one goal in mind: to understand the potential threat of this species. Yet in this moment, he found himself questioning everything he had believed about humanity. Perhaps he had underestimated them. Perhaps he had misunderstood the very nature of what it meant to be human. The next day, Korath observed Emily again. This time the game seemed easier to her, as though she had mastered it entirely. Her decisions were flawless, and her confidence grew with each victory. Yet, instead of growing complacent, she kept pushing herself to do better, to perfect her tactics, as if she knew there was always something more to learn, always a new way to approach a problem. No matter how many times she had faced it before, Korath felt a growing unease. There was something about this that unsettled him. And it wasn't just Emily's abilities, it was what her abilities represented. Humanity had something within them that was beyond his understanding, and perhaps beyond the understanding of any other species in the galaxy. It wasn't just intelligence, it was something deeper, something instinctual and raw. It was the strength of their spirit, something that would make them dangerous if they ever learned to harness it fully. He had expected to find a primitive species eager to conquer or be conquered, but instead, he was finding something much more complex, something far more unpredictable. He knew one thing for certain now: the humans were not to be underestimated. Korath's obsession with Emily's gameplay intensified as he watched her day after day maneuver through increasingly difficult scenarios. In the Starship simulator, her ability to consistently outwit the game's advanced algorithms baffled him. She was playing with ease, as though the game's design was an afterthought to her tactics. She didn't just play by the rules, she bent them to her will. The fluidity of her decision-making was a stark contrast to the rigid logic that governed his species' strategies. Korath knew that for his species the art of war was something carefully studied, calculated, and rehearsed. But Emily seemed to approach the game almost like an artist, using instinct as her brushstroke, rather than rigid training and formulas. She wasn't following what should have been the ideal playbook. She was improvising as she went, but her improvisation was flawless. More than that, it was brilliant. He ordered his officers to study her every action more closely, to map out her strategy for deeper analysis. They focused on each maneuver, how she reacted to surprises, how she used what little she had to gain an advantage over a superior foe. They'd watched her more closely than any human had ever been observed before, but each time they looked they saw nothing but excellence in her decisions. The more Korath thought about it, the more he felt he was watching something beyond just a game. The simulation, though primitive in nature, was the perfect environment to observe human instincts under pressure. Emily wasn't just reacting to the game, she was thinking several steps ahead, anticipating what would happen, not in the next moment, but in the moments that followed. Korath realized that in the vast galaxy no species had demonstrated the same adaptability as humans. Their ability to adapt under duress was something none of the more advanced races had possessed. The Zorethians, for example, were brilliant tacticians, but their thinking was always structured, linear, their responses predictable. The Elkar had superior tech, but they relied too heavily on their weapons, the idea of using one's own limitations as strength was foreign to them. The more Korath observed Emily, the more he began to wonder if there was something different about humanity that set them apart from every other species he'd encountered in his long years of service, something deeper than a simple tactical mind, something that couldn't be taught or replicated. No amount of simulations or strategic training could replicate the natural instincts Emily seemed to have, And it was her age that troubled him most. She was a child, one who had barely begun to understand the world around her, and yet her mind already worked like that of a seasoned veteran. The implications were staggering. Korath began to feel a strange sense of unease for the first time in his career. He began to wonder if he was witnessing something far more dangerous than he had initially thought. He had come to Earth expecting to find a primitive species no different from any other. The humans' potential for war seemed far below that of the more established galactic powers. Yet as he studied Emily and saw how she operated the simulator, he began to question everything he thought he knew about humanity. He realized that their true power wasn't in their weaponry or their technology, but in their minds, their creativity, their ability to see possibilities where others saw none. If Emily could do this as a child, what could humanity accomplish as a whole if given the right tools, if given the right leadership? The more Korath thought about it, the more he began to worry about what might happen if this species ever truly mastered space travel and war. It wasn't a question of if they would survive, it was a question of how they would change the balance of the galaxy forever. Korath's growing unease festered into a full-blown obsession. The more he watched Emily, the more he realized that her potential was something the galaxy had never seen before. He couldn't let this child's brilliance go untested, and so he decided to push her further. With the capabilities of his advanced technology, he manipulated the Starship simulator to present a challenge unlike anything Emily had faced before. The new simulation would be tailored specifically to test her limits, a seemingly insurmountable obstacle designed to force her into a corner with no way out. This time, the odds were stacked heavily against her. The enemy fleet in the simulation was massive, an armada of warships far superior to anything Emily had ever encountered. The sheer numbers were designed to overwhelm her, and the sophistication of the enemy's tactics far exceeded anything she had dealt with. Korath watched as Emily began the simulation, her fingers hesitating at first, her eyes flickering across the screen as the scale of the challenge sunk in. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. Korath leaned forward, eager to see how she would respond. He had expected her to panic or make rash decisions, as most would under such pressure, but instead, Emily took a deep breath and paused. The hesitation was brief, almost imperceptible, and then she moved. Her fleet was small, outnumbered by a factor of 5, but she wasted no time. Instead of facing the enemy head-on, she broke her fleet into smaller units, each one seemingly vulnerable but capable of swift movement. She maneuvered them with pinpoint accuracy, testing the boundaries of the game's programming. Korath couldn't believe it. Instead of running from the threat, she was using the environment of the simulation itself as her greatest ally. Emily lured the larger ships into a confined area, using the game's star maps to create choke points, artificial barriers that narrowed the enemy's choices. The enemy fleet, confident in its overwhelming strength, was drawn into her trap, unaware of the ambush that was waiting for them. As Korath watched the simulation unfold, he was impressed by the child's instinctive understanding of terrain manipulation. Even though she was outgunned and outnumbered, Emily understood the dynamics of the battlefield far better than Korath had ever expected. Each move was calculated to reduce the enemy's options, limiting their ability to escape or retaliate. Then, with swift and brutal efficiency, Emily set the trap in motion. Using a decoy fleet, she led a portion of the enemy forces into a dead zone, a space where there was no room for escape. As the enemy ships engaged the decoys, she struck with the remaining ships, overwhelming them with quick, precise attacks. Korath watched as the numbers on the screen dwindled. The enemy fleet was being defeated, one ship at a time, as Emily's tactics reduced the advantage of their superior numbers. Within moments, the once dominant enemy force was in retreat. Emily had done the impossible. She had turned the tide of battle in her favor, against an overwhelming foe. Korath sat back in his chair, stunned by what he had just witnessed. His officers, who had been silently observing, exchanged astonished glances. There was no way this was random. Emily had designed every move with the intention of exploiting her enemy's weaknesses. The simulation had been rigged to ensure failure, and yet she had found a way to win. It was no longer a game. It was a test, and she had passed it with flying colors. As the simulation ended and Emily leaned back from her console, Korath felt a sense of awe and growing dread. The child had done more than simply play the game. She had mastered it, bending its limitations to her will. It became clear to him now that Emily was not just an anomaly. She was a representative of something far larger. Humanity's unyielding drive to overcome adversity. This, he realized, was what made them truly dangerous. The galaxy had always valued brute strength and technology, but humanity was proving that ingenuity and resilience could turn the tide in ways no one could predict. Korath knew that he could never look at humanity the same way again. This wasn't just a species to be washed. This was a species that, if left unchecked, could one day reshape the galaxy. Korath could no longer ignore the significance of what he had witnessed. Emily's victory, against all odds, had shaken him to his core. He had come to Earth expecting to observe a primitive species, one easily controlled, but now he found himself facing a species capable of far more than he had ever anticipated. His mind raced as he pondered the implications of what he had just observed. The fleet was already preparing to move on, but Korath couldn't leave, not yet. He needed answers, and he realized the only way to find them was to speak directly with Emily. Using the advanced technology aboard his flagship, Korath initiated a covert communication to Emily's simulator, bypassing the basic interfaces and appearing as a shadowy figure on her screen. When Emily saw the figure materialize in front of her, she blinked in surprise, unsure whether this was part of the game or something else. But there was no mistaking the deep, resonant voice that followed. "Greetings, young strategist," Korath said, his voice carrying a strange mix of authority and curiosity. "You have impressed me." Emily, though startled, didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head, eyeing the screen with an intensity that matched her focus in the game. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity. "What's going on?" "I am Korath, the Admiral of an alien fleet," he replied. "And I have been observing you. Your gameplay, your decisions, they are unlike anything I've seen before. You have proven yourself capable of strategies far beyond what even seasoned warriors possess." Emily's brow furrowed in confusion. "Wait, you're not part of the game. But you're in the game. How did you get in here?" Korath chuckled, the sound rich with amusement. "I am not part of the game, but I have access to its controls. I wanted to understand the mind behind your victory." Emily's eyes widened, realization dawning on her. "You're real." She leaned forward, her excitement now palpable. "Are you like an alien? Like those stories my brother tells?" "Yes," Korath confirmed. "I am indeed an alien, and I am very much real. But your tactics, they are what I seek to understand. How does a child, someone so young, know how to command a fleet in battle like that?" Emily sat back, her fingers resting on the console. "I don't know. I just play the game. I guess I learned from reading books, watching shows with my brother, and playing with my friends. You know, it's not like real battles. I just try to think of what I'd do if I were in charge. What would work?" Korath was silent for a long moment. He had expected some form of formal education or rigorous training, but instead, Emily's response was so simple, so human. It was as if the answer was woven into the fabric of her very being. There was no need for advanced technology or war schools. Emily's ability to strategize came from her creativity and ability to adapt, a skill honed through play and imagination. This was something Korath had not anticipated, a method of warfare born not of the mind's cold calculation, but of pure instinct and insight. "Your understanding," Korath began slowly, "it's not something you learned from a teacher, but something within you, isn't it?" Emily nodded. "Yeah, I guess so. I don't know how to explain it. When I play, I just think, what would I do if I were there? What would work? How can I use what I have? It's kind of like a puzzle. If I can solve it, I win. The simplicity of her answer struck Korath like a bolt. It was the realization he had been avoiding. Humanity's greatest strength was their ability to think, to problem solve, to adapt. There was no rigid structure to their approach. They had no strict rules, no limiting frameworks. They were free to imagine and create, and in that freedom, they found a unique kind of power. Korath looked at Emily, his expression one of quiet contemplation. "You are unlike any species I've encountered," he said, his voice softer now. "The way you think, the way you approach conflict, it is unpredictable, and that makes you dangerous." Emily blinked, a little confused by the Admiral's tone. "Dangerous? I'm just playing a game." "That is where you are wrong, child," Korath replied, his gaze never leaving the screen. "You are not just playing. You are learning, growing, adapting. And in that, you hold the future of your species in your hands." Emily paused, the weight of his words sinking in. She didn't fully understand what the Admiral meant, but something in his tone made her realize that this was no ordinary conversation. She was no longer just a player in a game. She was something more, something he could not yet fully comprehend. And for the first time, Korath began to understand the true meaning of his mission. It wasn't just about observing humanity. It was about witnessing the rise of something new, something that could shape the course of the galaxy in ways no one could predict. Korath's mind was awash with new questions, each one more complex than the last. He had come to Earth expecting to find a species to study, perhaps to conquer, but what he had found instead was a force that challenged everything he thought he knew about intelligence, strategy, and survival. As he spoke to Emily, something shifted in him, a growing realization that the human spirit, their innate resilience and creativity, could not be understood in terms of traditional warfare. The child was showing him something that his years of battle experience had not prepared him for. Humanity's true strength was not in their technology, but in their imagination and their ability to adapt. Emily, on the other hand, was still trying to wrap her head around the situation. She had never expected to talk to a real alien, much less one who was impressed by her gameplay. She sat back, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and confusion. "I don't really understand what you mean. I'm just playing, you know. I'm not some super genius or anything." Korath smiled. Though Emily couldn't see it through the screen, the gesture softened his normally stern demeanor. "You may not recognize it, but your ability to think beyond what is obvious is precisely what sets you apart," he said, his voice more contemplative than before. "You do not think like other species. Most are bound by tradition, by rules, by the way things have always been. But you are capable of breaking those boundaries." Emily was silent for a moment, letting the words sink in. She glanced at the screen again, her fingers twitching nervously as she considered his words. "But you keep saying I'm different. I'm just a kid playing a game," she muttered, unsure of how to respond to something so big. Korath's voice softened further. "Perhaps that is what makes you most remarkable. You do not yet understand the limits of what you can accomplish. You are not bound by the experiences or expectations of others, which allows you to see things they cannot." The conversation hung between them, the silence stretching as Emily processed his words. To her, it was just a game, but to Korath, it had become a symbol of humanity's potential. He felt compelled to understand more about how Emily saw the world, how her mind worked, and why she thought the way she did. "Tell me," Korath asked carefully, "what do you think makes humans so different from other species? What makes you believe you can solve problems the way you do?" Emily furrowed her brow, thinking hard. "I think it's because we never give up. We always try to find a way, no matter how hard it gets. Even when we fail, we just keep trying again, right? Like in the game, I never think I can't win. I think, how can I make this work?" She smiled faintly, as if she had just solved a mystery. "Maybe that's it. We're always looking for a new way, even when the old one doesn't work." Korath's expression tightened, though his awe was still palpable. She was right. This was humanity's true weapon. Their refusal to give up, their relentless search for new solutions. He had witnessed their resilience firsthand in Emily, but now he understood that it was a characteristic shared by all humans. The human mind, free of the constraints of tradition, was constantly evolving, always adjusting to meet new challenges in ways that were impossible to predict. And that unpredictability made them dangerous. He let out a slow breath, the weight of the realization settling in. "This is what I needed to see," he said, his voice deep with thought. "Your kind is unpredictable, flexible, and relentless. If you ever learn to harness that potential, it will be unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen." Emily tilted her head, still not fully understanding the depth of the conversation. But there was something in Korath's tone that told her he wasn't just talking about a game anymore. "So, you're saying humans are like unstoppable?" Korath chuckled, though it was tinged with both admiration and concern. "In a way, yes. But remember, young strategist, with such power comes great responsibility. The ability to adapt and evolve means that you can change the future, but it also means you can create unforeseen chaos." Emily looked at the screen, the weight of his words settling on her. "So, what does that mean for Earth? For us?" Korath hesitated before answering, his voice grave. "It means that I, too, must evolve my understanding of your species. You are not simply another race to be conquered. You are a force in your own right. And that is something I must reckon with." The conversation left a lingering silence between them, as Korath processed the implications of what he had learned. He had come to Earth to assess a potential threat, but now he wasn't sure if Earth was the one he needed to be wary of, or if the galaxy would need to fear humanity itself in the future. Emily, sitting in front of her screen, suddenly felt very small, and yet somehow very significant. Korath's words echoed in Emily's mind long after their conversation ended. The weight of his admiration, mixed with a tinge of concern, lingered in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. She was just a kid, and yet here she was, talking to an alien admiral who was telling her that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The very thought felt impossible. She didn't feel like anything special, just someone who enjoyed a good challenge and loved to play games. But now, it was as if she had just stepped into a much bigger world, one that was far more complex than anything she could have imagined. The next day, Korath's fleet remained in orbit around Earth, silent and still. His officers had detected an odd shift in his demeanor, a change that had not gone unnoticed. There was something about the young human that unsettled him, something he couldn't shake. He had seen many things in his long life: wars, strategies, entire civilizations rise and fall. But humanity, particularly Emily, was something new. And that was something he was still trying to understand. Back on Earth, Emily couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled in her chest. She hadn't just defeated a game. She had caught the attention of an alien admiral. Part of her was proud. After all, who wouldn't be excited to impress an alien commander? But another part of her felt uneasy. She kept thinking about what Korath had said, that humans could create chaos if they weren't careful. But why? What did that mean for the future? In her small room, Emily sat down at her computer once again, staring at the screen in front of her. She had always loved the Starship simulator, but now it felt different. It was no longer just a game. It was a glimpse into something far greater. Her thoughts were interrupted when the screen flickered, and a new message appeared, blinking in bright text. "There is more to you than meets the eye. Emily, we must speak again." Her heart skipped a beat. She recognized the message format instantly. It was Korath. She quickly typed back, her fingers shaking just a bit. "What do you mean? Are you still watching me?" Moments later, a reply appeared. "Always. Your mind is unique, and I believe you have something to show me. Something your species will need to learn, and soon." Emily hesitated, but curiosity got the better of her. "What do you want to show me?" The reply came quickly. "A new simulation. A test. not of your skills, but of your understanding. There are those who are watching you now, on both sides. You must prepare." Emily blinked in confusion. "What do you mean on both sides?" For a long while, there was no response. Then, finally, "The galaxy is watching, and they do not view your species the same way I do. Prepare yourself, Emily. The time will come when your decisions will impact the course of the stars themselves." The message vanished, leaving Emily to sit in stunned silence. What did he mean by that? Who else was watching? And why was she suddenly being thrust into something so serious? She had only been playing a game, for goodness sake. But even as the doubts swirled in her mind, Emily couldn't ignore the underlying truth of Korath's words. Her ability to think in ways that were unconventional, to see things no one else had considered, it had caught his attention. And if an alien admiral, one who commanded a fleet of ships, was worried about her, then maybe it was time for her to start thinking bigger. For the first time in her life, Emily felt a weight on her shoulders. It was no longer just about winning a game. She was part of something far larger, something she could barely comprehend. She had been chosen, not for her intelligence or ability to outsmart the simulation, but for something much more significant: her potential to change the fate of humanity. The next day, Emily received a new challenge in the form of an encrypted transmission. Korath's message was brief but pointed. "This is not just a game. It's a glimpse of what is to come. Learn, adapt, and prepare. You must be ready, Emily." Korath's cryptic warnings didn't make sense yet, but Emily felt an urgency in his words that she couldn't ignore. She understood something now. The way she thought, the way she solved problems, it wasn't just about games. It was about humanity's future. She couldn't afford to just be a bystander. She had to prepare herself to lead, to think in ways no one else had. The galaxy had its eyes on Earth, and she was about to become an unwitting player in a much larger game. As she read the message over and over, Emily couldn't help but wonder, was humanity really ready for what was coming? And was she? Emily sat at her desk, the last words of Korath's message lingering in her mind like a heavy cloud. She hadn't realized how much weight had been placed on her shoulders until now. This wasn't just about winning a game anymore. This was about shaping the future of humanity itself. The weight of that responsibility felt almost too much to bear. How could she, a child playing a simulator, be expected to handle something so massive? But she also knew something else. Korath, the alien admiral who had been watching her, believed in her. He saw something in her that was more than just quick reflexes or smart tactics. It was her creativity, her ability to adapt, and her instinct for finding solutions where others saw none. And now, whether she was ready or not, humanity's future seemed tied to her ability to think and act in ways no one could predict. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Humanity's strength wasn't in its technology or its weapons, though they were impressive, but in the sheer adaptability of its people. It was their ability to think outside the box, to innovate, and to never give up, even when faced with seemingly impossible odds. That was the strength Korath had seen, and it was why he had warned her to prepare. But how could she prepare? She was just a kid who had learned to play a game. She didn't know how to lead a planet, or fight a war, or make decisions that could affect the course of history. Emily's fingers hovered over her keyboard. She stared at the flashing cursor, then at the blank screen in front of her, as if hoping some answer would materialize. But no solution appeared. Instead, a realization hit her. It wasn't about having all the answers right away. It was about learning to trust her instincts, just as she had done when playing the game. She'd never known the best way to win a simulation, but she had learned to feel her way through it, to adapt as the situation unfolded. She wasn't just playing a game anymore. She was in the middle of a much larger challenge, one that would take every ounce of her ability to adapt, think quickly, and trust her gut. And that meant she couldn't do it alone. She would need to bring others into this, people who could help her figure out what humanity's next steps should be. The galaxy was watching, and they weren't the only ones. A new message arrived on her screen, interrupting her thoughts. The message was from Korath, but it wasn't encrypted this time. He had decided to make it more direct, less cryptic. It was clear. He was preparing her for something bigger. The galaxy's great powers are not as patient as I am. They will act soon, and they will not ask for permission. You must begin to form alliances, to seek out those who understand the threat, and those who can help you lead. Time is running out. Emily's heart raced as she read the words. The galaxy's great powers. They will act soon. She could almost hear the ticking of a clock in her mind, counting down to an unknown moment of crisis. But how could she form alliances when she barely understood the situation? How could she lead when she didn't even know where to start? But Korath's words brought something else into focus. She wasn't alone in this. There were others, other humans, who would stand with her, who would fight for Earth, even if they didn't understand the whole picture. Emily had been given the opportunity to shape that future. And as scared as she was, she knew she couldn't back down. Her fingers moved to the keyboard once more, her thoughts racing. She had to start somewhere. Maybe she didn't have all the answers, but she could take the first step. She knew that to survive in this new world where the galaxy was watching, she would need to form a group, a team. One that could help her navigate the complexities ahead. She wasn't alone. Humanity wasn't alone. They had the power to change the future, if only they could come together. Emily took a deep breath and began typing, drafting a message to the people who might be able to help. It was just a start, just the first step in something that would grow far beyond her, but it was enough. The future was unwritten, but she would be the one to help write it. And as she hit send on her message, Emily realized that she was no longer just a child playing a game. She was a strategist, a leader, and perhaps the key to the future of humanity itself. The time had come to step up, and the galaxy would soon learn just how unstoppable humans truly were.